friends, this is Accurate Secrets of Longevity.com, and it's going to be a Q&A session today. And the first question is, someone's asking me what herbs or dietary measures they can utilize to increase one's rate of healing if they've had either surgery or some sort of wound or even a broken bone. Now, I'm not going to get into broken bones, but depending on what type of damage has gone on in your body, there's going to be certain different things you want to do to address that issue. With just a flesh wound from a surgery or some sort of fall, if it's just sort of like a gash, it's not too intense. Well, even for an intense thing, for anything, this is going to be the number one thing I'd recommend is colostrum. The IGF-1 and other growth factors in colostrum, as well as nerve regenerating factors, and that's really key if you're having some sort of nerve damage. It's the nerve regenerating growth factors or precursors to growth hormones that stimulate the regeneration of the nervous system. And it's also got all the different essential fatty acids in there that are very beneficial for regenerating the myelin sheath. But again, that's getting off topic from the question. But specifically the tissue, IGF-1 does regenerate faster. If you just think of how a child heals quickly and with very minimal scarring to any injury to their body, or even if a child's had a surgery, they recover really quickly compared to someone who's very old. And it's somewhere in between, it slows down. And basically what's happening is there's a buildup of scar tissue, which is not good afterwards and can actually be painful over time. They talk about keloids from scars, or fibrotic from a tissue from a scar can be painful. If you've ever had a large scar in your body somewhere and you're not really young and you've noticed that there's sort of a tenderness around it even up to a year or more afterwards, sometimes it can go away after a while if you have good reserves of enzymes. But the idea behind helping prevent this is to take in things that heal the body rapidly and completely so that scar tissue doesn't form. This fibrosis, which is like spider-like tissue that is made to quickly heal a wound. It's almost like your body is doing a really quick fix of something without really putting the time and effort to grow the tissue properly in the proper alignment. And then you end up with this tissue that's sort of not in the same formation as other tissue. The collagen's all messed up, and this is what can be painful. And then, of course, in the long term, calcification can form around this, and this is what a lot of athletes experience later on in life after injuries to their joints. They come back to haunt them when they're 50 plus. Now, the best thing, like I said, is colostrum. The next thing I'd put on my list of the top things to use is systemic enzymes. They go throughout the body, and the protein digesting enzymes are specifically designed to recognize these tissues that aren't of your body. So even your body makes these, and we get depleted over time. So that's why scarring is much more obvious and doesn't heal up as well later on in life, is because people, on average, lose these enzymes over time. So raw food can definitely help, but that's more of a long-term thing. You have the enzymes available. You're not going to get these things from raw food. These are special enzymes made by your body. So in terms of herbs, it's hard to give any one recommendation. Basically, all your JING tonics are going to be very beneficial for this. I've done many videos on JING tonics in the past, so I'm not going to go on a big list. But I will say probably the top one you want to look at is deer antler velvet, because it also has that IGF-1 factor, which is going to be very regenerative. When it comes to a bone break, you'd be looking more at things like comfrey, nettles, oat straw, horsetail, all these things that are high in silica and other minerals that are really regenerative to the bones. Also, eucomial bark is a great one for joint injuries. So the next question is from someone that's asking about raw dairy, and they've heard horror stories about E. coli and people getting sick from raw milk. And yes, it has happened. It does happen when you have a raw product like that. That's how, almonds can get E. coli on them. But technically that story, if we look back to it, the almonds that caused that thing that caused almonds to be pasteurized in California was due to them being left out on the floor with like rats and stuff. So that's a good example of what causes something that's raw to become contaminated. And this happens even with cooked food. Cooked food actually goes rotten and grows mold and festers actually quicker than a raw food that's still living will. For E. coli to get into the dairy, you have to have a farm that is very dirty in terms of not having a good procedure when they're milking the cows. So cows generally in a field, they're going to get some dirt and also their own feces on their udders and undersides. But most farmers, when they have their milking equipment, it suctions onto the nipples of the cow, and then it first washes them and pumps like warm water with some sort of mild detergent onto the cow's udder. And then also the stainless steel piping is sanitized in between milking with searing hot water and soap and what other detergents they're using. Of course, that heat isn't there during the milking of the raw milk, but it's something that's flushed through the piping in between milkings. So for there to be E. coli getting into the milk, number one, you have to have E. coli in the cow that's pooping on the ground and then getting that on the udders and it not being cleaned properly and then getting in the milk that way. So it's not coming from the cow's milk itself, it's coming from the outside and bad sanitary practices. For there to be E. coli in the cow's feces, number one, it has to be a sick cow, so generally this is only an issue with highly grain-fed animals, and this is because it breaks down the cow's immune system. They get exposure to something at some point and they can't fight it off, and it's just present in their digestive tract and that gets into the feces. So pasteurization was only invented in a time period a couple hundred years ago when there was deplorable conditions. People didn't know much about the germ theory. They didn't know much about what would make people sick, the actual pathogen of the cause of this. Of course, there's the terrain, and if you have poor terrain, you're going to be more susceptible to carrying a pathogen, but the pathogen does matter as well, so we want to prevent that. And so pasteurization was a result of having bad conditions and cooking the milk so that the bacteria was all killed off. But you're also killing the good bacteria, and furthermore, you're killing the enzymes that help digest the milk, and the bacteria is still dead and floating in the milk, and your body, the immune system has to still get rid of that. Your body still has to deal with it, even though it's dead. It's not harming you in the sense that the bacteria is attacking you and making you sick. But people, like a lot of that mucus formation problems people get, can be a combination of the lack of lactase enzyme for breaking down the milk lactose, and then also the large amount of bacteria your body has to dispose of, the dead bacteria from the cooking. So the problem with, in my area of the country, in Canada, is raw milk is illegal. Now the problem that creates is people still want raw milk, so it's going to push the industry underground, and then you can't have the regulations in check to keep things being done properly. So there's going to be farmers that don't do things exactly to the standards that we would all hope them to keep them to. But places where raw milk is legal, it's been shown quite flawlessly that this can be done perfectly well when the procedures are kept in check. Even when they're not kept in check, a cow that's being fed grass is going to be way healthier than a cow that's being fed grain, and so they're going to have a much healthier manure, and it's not going to have pathogens in it. Thomas has asked a question about cooking grains and sprouting them. While I personally don't consume grains much at all, if ever, I occasionally consume some spread buckwheat, but it just hasn't been something that I've been drawn to. Of course, I do consume soaked oat groats, steel-cut oats, which I've mentioned in previous videos. But in terms of a larger staple in one's diet of consuming grains, that's not something I overly advocate people doing, but if it's something you're drawn to trying out, I suggest go for it. And yes, your question specifically was, is sprouting before cooking them pointless? And actually it is very good to do that before cooking them, because you actually raise the protein availability by 3 times. I think I've heard some people say up to 7 times makes the protein more available. So that means it's more absorbable. But of course, once you cook it, you're going to lose a little bit. But from sprouting it, there's still going to be, specifically the beans, there's going to be certain indigestible proteins that are rendered a little bit more digestible through cooking, oddly enough. So sprouting lentils, and even just soaking stuff. It doesn't necessarily have to sprout and get a little tail. Just soaking rice for a day or two before actually cooking it. And if you're consuming rice every day, you just have several bowls out on your counter that was like day 1, day 2, and then the day of that you're consuming it. Yeah, this is great. It's recommended in nourishing traditions that you do this with all the grains you consume, and that's how things were traditionally done. You can even use fermenting grains. Often when I do make from buckwheat sprouts, I don't consume them that quickly. They sit in my fridge and they do start to ferment a little, but it's still perfectly okay to consume because it's a living food. It's not fermenting because of bad bacteria. It's actually just something healthy that's going on. You feel good actually consuming it. I find I have less gas once it's fermented than if it's something that's just been sprouted. Of course, if you're cooking it, I'd recommend you consume some form of enzyme product with it to help digest that, because your body's using up those enzymes to digest it. Like I mentioned, that could actually be used to break down and consume the fibrotic tissue that is naturally growing in your body through wear and tear of everyday life. Christopher has asked if you got candida, cancer, diabetes, or any other sugar-exacerbated issue going on. He's wondering about the Gerson therapy of carrot juice and apple juice and a lot of these other high-sugar fruit juices and vegetable root starchy juices that are recommended from certain therapies of the past, and even still ongoing, and some people are engaging in them. I'd say there's much better stuff going on now. It's true that sugar will feed those things, so it's not ideal in those situations. Of course, people that were having success with that were coming from a program that was very laden with all sorts of processed foods, probably too many animal products, probably grain-fed animal products, probably too many grains, just basically anything in the lifestyle that wasn't optimal. And they were coming onto a plan that was very live, very vitamin-rich, very raw, and still has all its nutrients intact. So yes, that's how they had success with that, but the success can be greater if you follow something like the Hippocrates plan or Dr. Gabriel Cousins' plan from the Tree of Life Rejuvenation Center, if you have one of those issues going on. And those are specifically low sugar to no sugar plans for the issues that you are encountering. Now, the last part of that question you were asking in regards to dehydrating food, is it optimal to jack a dehydrator up to 145 for a few hours before turning it back down, just to kill off any bacteria? Now, if you're killing off the bacteria, you're also killing off enzymes. They're both equally as susceptible. And you're also lowering the overall electromagnetic output of the foods that are still living. If you look at the Kirlian photography images that compare cooked food to living food, that's in its raw state, hasn't been altered by exposure to high temperatures, it's drastically different, and you do feel these things when you take them in, especially if you're used to consuming very high vibrational living food. So when you're dealing with vegetables, nuts, seeds, you're not cooking them before you consume them anyways, just when you're making a raw dish that isn't dehydrated. So if you're going to dehydrate it, what's the point of doing that? Because you're wanting to keep it raw. That's the whole idea behind that. And a quick question here from someone that's asking about women experiencing hot flashes later on when they're encountering menopause. And the root cause of that is definitely hormones. So going all sorts of imbalances. And you can't say there's a balance point for women. There's no specific set point that we need to aim to get our hormones at, both for men and women, but there are ideals. And for women, they're going to want to be looking at a good 100% natural progesterone cream, high doses of maca, the JING tonics like Hoshiwu and Romania, and also something like deer antler velvet, like I've already mentioned, is a great product for bringing balance to the overall hormonal system, and can actually, in some cases, cause a woman who's already stopped her period to get back onto her period. It'll just start happening again. And that's very sort of anomalous, which is something I'm always interested in, how this sort of that shady area that not much of the mainstream medical establishment is aware of and even acknowledges. It's kind of a fascinating sort of twilight zone, you could say. So I want to encourage any of you out there to give me a shout, either through a message or a comment if you've got some pressing question that you want me to answer on the next Q&A. And I'll also ask you to check out the link below, which is a link to my consult page if you're looking to get a number of questions answered, or you have a health challenge you want to get some feedback on, get my advice on. and I can help you with any health issue you may be encountering, whether you're working with multiple practitioners already or not. As you see from my videos here, I've got a wealth of information I'm very much open to sharing. I believe I can help you address some of those things. So with that, embrace life without limits and take care. I'll see you next time.